And tonight, we welcome from Pennsylvania the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for House Affairs, Mr. Joel Rubin, to discuss election day dynamics. Welcome, sir, to our special coverage of the U.S. election. And, sir, how do you assess Kamala Harris's current chances of winning the presidency? What key factors are influencing her position in the race?
Well, it's great to be with you from Pennsylvania live on the campaign trail. And I would much rather be Kamala Harris right now than Donald Trump. That's for sure. She is doing well nationally. She's doing well in the swing states. And here in Pennsylvania, where I've spent the last 10 days, there's a lot of enthusiasm for her on the ticket, and in particular amongst the undecided voters. And that's a critical component of this election, because we're looking at swing states being decided by a very narrow margin. And it's those last minute deciders, those undecideds who then decide, that are going for Kamala Harris by more than 10 points. And that could very well put her in the White House next year.
Mr. Rubin, given your previous experience in the federal government, what challenges do you foresee Harris facing with Congress if she becomes president, especially in terms of bipartisan cooperation?
You know, there's something about the presidency that gives it an authority that even when Congress is divided, and it's quite possible that we will have a Republican Senate, meaning it would change power, and a Democratic House, meaning that would change power. But when you have a president in the White House, it's a very powerful perch. And there are many issues that the American people care deeply about that have longstanding bipartisan support, but have been blocked in the past year in particular by Donald Trump for political purposes. And the number one issue that I believe she would tackle would actually be the question of immigration, where there was a bipartisan agreement in the Senate that was going to tackle immigration, and that was stopped because Donald Trump did not want to resolve the issue because he needed it for the campaign. That's something she could work on quickly. She can also work on many economic development measures, tax credits for people starting businesses and buying homes, and really work on some of the core issues that Americans care about right now related to immigration and the economy.
How has Harris's time as vice president shaped her credibility and qualifications as a potential president? Do you think that this experience boosts her chances in the race?
She's got a strong Washington experience, but she's still relatively new in Washington. She got to Washington in 2017, so that's only 7 or so years ago. But she was a senator. She did work in the Congress for 3 solid years. She has relationships across the aisle. And as vice president, she also was officially the president of the Senate. And she cast many tie-breaking votes while in the Senate. So she understands the institution. She does, if she gets the House that's Democratic, she would have a strong ally there. And so it's going to be about finding senators across the aisle who she can work with. And I think after Donald Trump loses, and I expect he will, that will be a window of opportunity for the Republican Party to come back to normal, traditional Republican policy making without his political pressure from behind. And so we may see a lot of opportunities for bipartisan consensus. One last thing I should say, she has the broadest coalition of support I've ever seen for a presidential candidate. She has former Vice President Dick Cheney, who was a Republican vice president, as well as Bernie Sanders, the most progressive senator in Congress, both on her side. So she has built a very broad campaign coalition that will help her as a governing coalition as well.
I would take from your expectations, Mr. Rubin, if she wins, what areas do you believe Kamala Harris would prioritize in her policy agenda if she wins the presidency, according to your expectations?
Her priorities are going to be some key issues that the voters care deeply about that are supporting her. The first one, of course, is the question of abortion and women's health care and women's rights, and the goal of getting legislation to restore abortion rights in this country that were taken away by the Supreme Court. After that, we are looking, of course, at key questions of the economy and of ensuring that the tax code is working in a manner that's fair, that there are tax breaks given to new businesses, new first-time home buyers as well. We're also looking at healthcare issues more broadly and strengthening healthcare, strengthening the ability of Americans to access healthcare. And I do think on foreign affairs as well. We're going to see a lot of initiatives. She has been a strong ally of Ukraine, as well as a strong supporter of Israel. She's also been a strong voice for Middle East peace. And so we may very well see her take some initiatives in that area, as only a commander-in-chief can do.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of foreign policy, what shifts or continuities might we expect from a Harris administration compared to the current policies?
Much of her agenda is identical to President Biden's agenda, without a doubt. She is the sitting vice president. Sorry for the noise. We're outside a polling station here. She's the sitting vice president. She is, of course, one of the decision makers alongside the president on his foreign policy. And so I think we're going to see her really strengthen American support for Ukraine in the months of her first term. And we'll also see moves by her to try to find a pathway out of the war between Israel and Hamas and to get the hostages back, to get a ceasefire, to move on diplomatic roads towards peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I can see that as a high priority. And then the third, of course, is the question of China. And China has there's broad bipartisan support for a strong policy on China, but she is very, very smart about the use of diplomacy and building up our allies and our relations abroad. And so strengthening our alliances abroad, especially related to China, would also be a high priority.
Given the current political climate, how would you assess Donald Trump's chances of winning the presidency in the upcoming election?
Well, obviously, we're a very divided country, and clearly Donald Trump has significant support. The challenge for him is that he is losing in the polls, even in the swing states. And there's a sense amongst Democrats that these polls are also biased towards Republicans. And I can explain why. The short answer is because they are manufacturing many polls and populating the public discussion with that. And so we'll see. But the problem here is that Donald Trump is already talking as if the election was stolen before even any votes were cast. And he's trying to discredit the American electoral process. And that's not just an anti-American position, but it's also not true. Our elections are free and fair and safe. And when there are problems, as you appropriately described in the voting, those will be dealt with in the legal manner. And if it needs to go to court, they will go to court. But Donald Trump and his team have been preparing to try to sue, to prevent votes from being counted, to prevent mail-in ballots from being counted, to try to prevent where likely more Democrats are voting, where they actually get their ballots counted. That will not work, but he's discrediting the program and the elections. And that's unfortunate. To me, that also shows that he doesn't have a lot of confidence that he'll win.
How do you view Trump's relationship with his voter base? Do you think that it will be sufficient to secure his victory in the elections?
Well, I do think he has strong support amongst his voters. They're very passionate about him. The challenge for Donald Trump has always been about how to go beyond his most passionate supporters and expand it to moderates. And only in the last week, we have seen a falling back of that approach. In fact, he had a very devastating rally, his closing rally at Madison Square Garden a little over a week ago, where many of his speakers used racist language, one even calling Puerto Rico an island of garbage, offending Puerto Ricans who are American citizens. And the third largest group of Puerto Ricans in the United States live in the swing state of Pennsylvania. That had a major negative impact on his campaign and his ability to convince independents and people who are undecided that he has what it takes to continue to be serving in the White House. Mm-hmm. And so I think for him, he's having a real hard time convincing new voters to join his side.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Rubin, my final question to you. If Trump wins the elections, what would be his top legislative priorities, and how do you foresee these impacting his relationship with Congress?
Well, as we discussed, immigration may very well be his first priority, but it will not look anything like what Kamala Harris is proposing, which is a smart, sophisticated, pragmatic approach to dealing with our border crisis. What Donald Trump has promised to do is to deport millions of Americans. So he will immediately plunge the United States into chaos. There will be a massive debate about whether or not that is possible. How will he do it? And we will see a lot of fear spread across the United States, similar to what we saw in 2017 when we had major protest marches like the Women's March in early 2017 after he took office. And when he tried Muslim ban, there were protests against that as well. So we will see a period of chaos as he tries to implement his idea of deporting millions of people who are here in the United States.
Well, that was the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for House Affairs, Mr. Joel Rubin. Thank you, sir, very much for joining us here on Q News.